All right, theoretically, we are recording. So don't say anything you would regret if other people heard it.
Okay.
Which
This is
I
Ed
will no
Green,
doubt do.
Director of IRCOS, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you. Most of you, I can say, welcome to tomorrow morning for us to what will be a very enjoyable and informative session. I want to just take a minute to welcome Bill Rankin and B. Liederman to the IRCOS webinar series. Very quickly, Bill has been a learning experience and frameworks designer and educational theorist, and he served as worldwide director of learning at Apple from 2013 through 2016. He has an enormous record of presentations and having been interviewed by all sorts of news media outlets about teaching and learning in the new world in a way. So we're very, very happy that he and B have agreed to join with us this evening or this morning and to share some really exciting ideas about what they're doing. B. Liederman is a teacher, an instructional coach in Richmond, Virginia, and her work focuses largely on helping teachers create environments where students can demonstrate their learning through creative, open-ended projects. She was selected as an Apple Distinguished Educator, and she served as chair of the Greater Richmond Area Educational Technology Consortium. She is also a co-founder with Bill of Unfold Learning, which I think is one of the most apt descriptions of what we are all trying to do with teaching and learning in these days. So B and Bill, welcome. The camera and the slides are all yours. So we're just going to enjoy the next hour or so. I think I can tell our guests that generally we wait until the end to take questions unless there's something hugely pressing. And B will monitor the questions as they come in through the chat. If you have a question, generally we go about an hour and then some 20 to 30 minutes if needed for questions and answers. But I'm really excited about this evening and look forward to hearing from both of you. And again, welcome everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ed. We really appreciate it. And we're really excited about being here with everyone tonight or tomorrow morning or whenever it is. We don't know, but anyway, today, so this is actually the first of a two-part kind of workshop and presentation series. And the next installment will be on Saturday, May 8th in the morning if you're in Asia, or Friday, May 7th, if you are in our time zone in the US. And so this one is going to be a little more kind of painting the big picture, and I'm going to do the kind of setup, and then next week B will do a lot of hands-on where we'll actually design using this strategy, this structure that we're going to talk about today.
And as Ed said, if you have any questions, if you type them in the chat, I'll try to answer as we go, or wait till the end if it needs a more involved answer.
Not any questions. You can't just ask any questions. Like, we don't know a whole lot about why the muons are not behaving properly and what that's going to do to the standard model. So don't ask us about that. But you can ask us about teaching and learning things generally, or about stuff that we're talking about here, and we'll try to answer it, although we might not answer it well. You will answer it well.
Maybe.
I would think you're
Okay.
pretty good at that. So we're going to start by thinking about some learning design stuff. And we thought maybe we've got a lot of different people from a lot of different places. And we thought it might be fun to do a sort of version of the 6-word story. Have you guys heard of 6-word stories? I seem frozen. You're let's see,
You're lagging a little bit, but you're okay.
My internet connection is unstable. Excellent. All right. Well, we're not sure what that is, but anyway, okay. So
It's fine now.
we hope that it will be all right. So we're going to do a quick exercise with 6-word stories. I don't know if that came through or not. The most famous 6-word story, ostensibly by Hemingway, though I think this is apocryphal, was to tell a story in just 6 compact words. So, for sale, baby shoes, never worn. A powerful story. But we're not going to do it exactly that way. So what we're going to do is we've got a bunch of different words here, and we'd like you to pick 6 of these. You can add other words if you want to, and you can modify these words, add a to in front of them, or make them into a gerund or a present progressive, so ing or meant or ers or whatever. But we'd like you to pick 6 of these and write what your philosophy of teaching is, and you can post those up in the chat as just a way of everyone getting to know a little bit about everyone else. So ours might be: learners and teachers form a community to engage in discovery, make projects that serve their neighbors, and develop wisdom. So we've got those 6 words: learners, teachers, engage, make, serve, develop. We've got some other words too. So we're going to take about 1.5 minutes. And if you would make your 6-word learning story and throw it up in the chat, and then we'll look at those and talk in a moment. So I'm going to set a timer for 1.5 minutes-ish. All right, and so let's see what we can do.
Oh, here they come.
Very nice.
Very nice.
Kelly's is interesting. Learning develops engagement. We often put those in reverse. Engagement develops learning, but that's an interesting way to think about it.
Oh, I love this one. Teachers and learners to enjoy, apply, and achieve goals to serve a global community.
Very nice. We've got about 15 seconds left. Developing engaging opportunities for learners to discover, apply, and create. That's very nice. A love for learning, yeah.
Engage students at their level. That's very nice.
The trend that we're seeing here, and feel free to keep, if you want to keep working on those and post those up as you go, but I'm seeing several interesting structures here. That there's a lot of interest in engaging learners and understanding how engagement and learning are connected to one another. There's a lot of discussion of service and a lot of discussion of kind of love or of catching learners in that process, that enjoyment of learning. And I think that's really useful. And we're hoping that this structure that we're going to introduce to you today, that this will give you some strategies and some ways to do this. And we're specifically going to be introducing a framework that's about constructionism, about learning by making, by engaging. So lots of different people have written about this and talked about this. Most famously, obviously, John Dewey thought a lot about this. Maria Montessori thought a lot about this. People going all the way back into prehistory have certainly considered that learning by doing things with your hands is very important. We're also going to consider some of the community aspects moving forward. So, we'd love to keep seeing these, and hopefully this is also a way of finding a friend and saying, hey, you know, if there's someone you don't know on the call, someone whose learning story you really like. But thinking about engagement, thinking about especially students, learners' own levels, thinking about engaging learners with their communities and service, that's exactly what we want to talk about today and what we want to think about. So, hey, we're already sharing, so we don't even have to really do that right now. I forgot that slide was there. Sometimes I forget about things. Okay, so this is, you introduced this book to me.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the Research Council in the United States has written a book. It's now pretty old, but they have not updated it. And even if it's as old as it is, it's an excellent read.
Although a bit of a grueling read at times.
It's very dense. But the research shows that students come to the classroom with preconceptions about how the world works. If their initial understanding is not engaged, they may fail to grasp the new concept and information, or they may learn them for the purposes of a test and revert to their preconceptions outside of the classroom. So they'll do things for the grade, but they will not change who they are, and therefore they're not really learning.
So you have to engage preconceptions, and that's a tough one, because often what we do is we convey information to learners, but we don't really necessarily collide into their preconceptions. And if those preconceptions aren't challenged, we can learn stuff, the National Research Council discovered some years ago, but it doesn't actually change who we are. It doesn't change how we think. And I've done this for a while. We've got some new stuff too, but this is a kind of old one. If you've done this with me, you already know about this, but I'm going to assume that everyone on this call had rudimentary science classes when you were a learner some time ago. And so this should be very easy. We've got just a little science experiment here we're going to talk through, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And so let's imagine that I have a steel plate. And what I am going to do is I am going to heat the steel plate. I am not going to melt it. I am going to heat it until it becomes hot. And do you remember what happens to a steel plate that gets heated? Hopefully somewhere in science class, you talked about this. Are you hearing my audio okay? Because I'm very laggy.
No, I hear your audio okay.
All right. So what usually happens, it expands. That's exactly right.
It turns red.
It turns red and warms. Well, that's also possible. But it expands because what we're really doing when we add heat to the system is we're adding energy to the system. So the molecules that make up the steel plate, they're going to have more energy. So they're going to bounce off of one another with greater force. And that's going to push out. It's going to push out at all of the sides of the steel plate, because it's going to, those molecules are going to get more excited and they're going to get less dense as they bounce off each other with more energy. So the plate is going to get a little bit longer and a little bit wider and a little bit thicker. Does that make sense? Do you remember all this? Right. So exactly right. So the kinetic energy increases and the whole thing becomes less dense. So I am now going to put a hole in the middle of the steel plate, and I am once again going to heat it. And here is what I'm wondering, although don't put your answer in the chat. But what I'm wondering is, what happens to the circumference of the hole as the plate heats? Does the circumference of the hole get smaller? Does the circumference of the hole get bigger? Or does the circumference of the hole stay the same? So write your answer down so that you can be held accountable. Don't put it in the chat, but write it down. It's going to be very important soon, but not yet. In the meantime, while we're thinking about what happens to the size of the hole in the steel plate as it heats, we're going to talk about this guy called Derek Muller, who's become a bit of an internet sensation. He runs a blog and site called Veritasium. And it's really fun. He's got a lot of great stuff. But a few years ago, he was doing a PhD program in physics at the University of Sydney. And he found almost exactly what Bransford, Brown, and Cocking found, that students have existing ideas about scientific phenomena. And what he would show them, what he was trying to understand how Khan Academy videos worked. Were they helpful for helping students learn about physics? So he showed them Khan Academy videos and assessed the value of those videos. And what he discovered was this: if the video presented scientific concepts in a clear, well-illustrated way, students believed they were learning, but they did not engage with the media on a deep enough level to realize that what was presented differed from their prior knowledge. So here was his little test. He gave people a pre-test of their knowledge of basic physics principles, and they scored, on average, 6 out of 26. Okay, so he showed them Khan Academy videos, and before he gave them a post-test, he asked them how they felt about those videos. They said they were really helpful, they were really clear, we really liked them, we learned a lot, they were great. And then he gave them a post-test, and those people scored 6.2 out of 26. No functional difference at all. So what he did was he wanted to figure out a new way to engage with the learners, because what he discovered was that those learners went through a series of steps. First of all, they thought they knew the concepts already. Because of that, they did not pay utmost attention. Because of that, they did not recognize that what was presented actually differed from what they were thinking, so that didn't engage their prior knowledge, so they didn't learn a thing. And then, this is the cherry on top, they got more confident in the incorrect ideas they were thinking before. So what Muller did was he created some videos that started out just like the Khan Academy videos, but in the middle, it slammed people into a problem that they couldn't quite figure out, that challenged their preconceptions. And he asked the students, the subjects of his test, how they felt about those videos. They were really frustrating. I didn't understand it. It was not helpful. It bothered me. I didn't learn anything. But after watching those videos, the students scored 12 out of 26. So here we go. Back to our steel plate. You can now post your answer. Does the hole get bigger or smaller? I see someone has already posted. Circle gets larger. Jeremy says smaller. Put your vote up there quickly. Smaller. Got a couple of votes for smaller, bigger. So far, we're at 50-50. There's a bunch of you not voting. Smaller, smaller, smaller. Yeah, lots of smallers. Smaller seems to be the most popular answer. It typically is. And it just makes sense if you think about it, because as the molecules are pushing out at all the edges, it's going to push out at those edges, and that circle will get. Hang on just a minute. I'm just thinking about this. So Let's imagine we had a series of dots evenly spaced around that circle. If we squeezed that circle so that it were smaller, those dots would get closer together, right? But if those dots are getting closer together, that means those dots are getting more dense. And if those are not dots, but those are molecules, it means for the circle to get smaller, those molecules are going to have to poke each other. They're going to have to get closer and closer and tighter. And that is absolutely not what happens. The circle, of course, gets larger. And if you imagine this, if you did not think about it as a whole, then it makes a lot more sense. Imagine that I have a plate and I've drawn a circle on it. What happens when I stretch the plate? Well, the circle drawn on it is going to get bigger, right? The problem is that you were thinking logically, you just weren't thinking like scientists. Now, theoretically, all of you passed your exams, and some of you may even teach science. And you know, that's okay. But what this means is the whole, of course, gets bigger. And that means that just learning about a thing, just getting information is not enough. We don't take in knowledge until we have to collide with a problem and recalibrate. And this is a reason for doing projects in classes. How many of you know who this fellow is? Our friend Bob Ross. He's lovely, isn't he? Have you watched Bob Ross?
I'm going to load this full of paint.
Oh, this is so
often
good.
We avoid this big brush because of its size. But the
He's
big brush
so
can do fantastic
affirming.
things. Wiggle it. Wiggle it. That
Showing
loads
you the
bristles forward and
technique.
pull it. That makes it very sharp. And we're loading this brush to a chisel edge. It takes a lot of paint in the brush. You need enough paint to hold the bristles together. See how sharp it is?
I'm going to break this to you. We're about to make a happy tree.
Now then,
Be ready.
Tell you what, maybe a happy little evergreen lives right there.
A happy little evergreen.
And just the
Don't
corner
you
of the
know?
brush. Again, working back and forth.
Bob Ross is lovely. He is a lovely fellow. But interestingly, watching Bob Ross, you feel so affirmed and so happy that you think, I could do that. I could become a painter. I could make happy little trees, and there are no accidents. And Bob Ross tells me everything is going to be okay. And I have this vision that comes out for this future of learning where everything is delivered and everyone is happy. And it's a beautiful paradise and utopia. And it will never work because recent evidence from, why is my computer not responding? Hang on, I'm just going to skip ahead here to this slide. Hang on a moment, we're having a technical problem. Have you ever had one of those?
That's lovely, right here.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. How awkward. So there was some really interesting recent research by a couple of folks, Cardis and O'Brien at University of Chicago. This is also something you found. Yeah.
Right. So they did research on how watching video or accessing information through modern technologies gives people the illusion that they're acquiring skills.
And this is a huge number of people. It's a couple thousand people, an N of 2,225.
So they had them watch videos and on YouTube of how to do something, and they asked them how they felt.
By the way, this is a really fun paper to read. They did 6 crazy experiments, including like having people watch
how to pull the tablecloth out from under the table. From under
a set table.
Set table, so
Yeah.
without disturbing all the plates and glasses. And they did several different videos showing people how to do things. And And then they asked them, how do you feel? Do you think you could do that? And people were very confident that they could do what they had watched the video. They had watched it multiple times and paused and looked again. And the more people watched the video, the more certain they were that they could do what the people were doing in the video.
However, people's actual abilities did not improve after merely watching, despite their own predictions to the contrary. And what they discovered was the experiential gap between seeing and doing sometimes led people to assume that they had learned more from watching than they actually had. So they had this illusion of skill acquisition. And this was one of their experiments,
Right.
Juggling a bowling pin.
They were showing people how to juggle bowling pins. And
Really just one at a time. Just toss it up in the air and catch it.
Just one bowling pin. Can you toss it, make it twirl, and catch it again? And people were very confident that they could do it. And when they watched the video, they all said yes. They watched it 3 times and they said, yes, I can do this. So then for one group of people, they gave them an explanation. They said, this is how you do it. This is how you toss it. This is how you catch it. The next group, they told them, this is how heavy the bowling pin is, and this is how long it is, and it's going to be rotating and at a certain speed. And they were very excited that they could still do it. They were still very confident.
And you can see their confidence in their ability to perform this task didn't really change from watching a video about it to getting more information about it. It stayed pretty much the same.
The last group, though, they told them, just hold this bowling pin.
For 1 minute.
And they held the bowling pin for 1 minute. And then they looked up and said, maybe it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be. Just holding the bowling pin was very important because they realized what they were seeing in the video that looked so easy was actually going to take work on their part, which is important when you're talking to students and you want to instill in them the need to work to achieve.
And part of the problem is the Bob Ross challenge, which is that if I feel like Bob Ross makes it look so effortless and easy, and I think, wow, that's going to be so simple for me when I can't perform as well as Bob can. I think there must be a problem with me. I must be inferior, and I can get really frustrated, or I can stop being engaged in the learning process because I just don't want to do that. I can't do it. I can't do it. So I'm just not going to do it. So the key here is that we don't learn as much from watching as from an experience.
And the experience can be very simple. It can be something in this example, for example, just holding the bowling pin. So actually doing something, engaging with what you're doing in any way other than just listening or watching is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, and it has to do with the barrier that we form between just taking in information and then cognitively sensing stuff, doing stuff with our hands, which changes our relationship with the materials we're working on. And one great example of this is this guy, Tom Skoka. So Skoka is actually an internet writer, and he's read a lot of things, written about a bunch of things. But one of the things he decided to check out in his work on the internet was he kept seeing these discussions that you could caramelize onions in about 5 minutes. And so he wanted to see whether that was true. He looked at all these examples over and over again. When he would Google caramelizing onions, it would say about 5 minutes. And so he tried all of the different methods for doing it. And what he discovered was it's impossible. You either end up with onions that are not caramelized at all, they're barely cooked, or they're just scorched. In fact, no less an authority than Julia Child says it takes about 30 to 40 minutes to caramelize onions, but he kept running across this stuff on Google that said 5 minutes. So he wrote an article debunking the 5-minute onion caramelization. And he put his article out there and he said, if you do a search, you'll find that you can caramelize onions in about 5 minutes, but this is a lie. Here are all the different ways I've tried it, and here's what happened. Unfortunately, Google's algorithm scraped just the first part of his article and said, Tom Skokas says you can caramelize onions in about 5 minutes. And in fact, his article saying you couldn't do it became the first snippet, and they actually took a quote out of it that he was later disagree with, and were using him as the authority for 5-minute caramelization. And so it's kind of goofy, but he tried it out to see if all this information that was out online was right. And what he discovered was it's not. So testing for yourself can help you discover real truths. So all of this to say, we don't know what's real until we try it out and apply it to our own contexts, apply ourselves to it, and work together. So if we're in the business of helping learners know, then we have to come to this conclusion. Knowing about a thing, getting information about it, watching it, observing it, learning about the process, knowing about it is not the same as actually knowing it. And learning about a thing, that means, is not the same as knowing it. And that means learning about a thing is not the same as learning. So now let's think about some community models of learning. If the learning is going to be experiential, what does that experiential learning look like, and how do we build that into a learning community? I don't know if you know Etienne and Beverly Wenger-Trainor. Etienne Wenger did some work with Jean Lavey in Canada a number of years back, and Etienne and Beverly now are running this wonderful center where they're thinking about communities of practice. And their idea is that a community of practice has these 3 characteristics. It's first of all, a group of people who share a concern or a passion and interact regularly. So this could be knitters, it could be motorcyclists, it could be particle physicists, photographers. Bee's a big photographer. But this is a community forms when a group of people who share a concern or passion interact regularly. And they do that over a domain in which they are active participants. In other words, it's very hard for a community to form if there is not a thing around which they form, and if they are not actively participating in that domain. So photographers share ideas about lenses and techniques and software. They're not only thinking about the domain of photography, but it's less reputable if someone doesn't take pictures. Like, you've seen photographers.
If you talk to a person who talks a lot about taking pictures, but never actually takes pictures, you better not believe what they're saying.
That's right. So being an active participant, and
or somebody who collects lots of cookbooks, but never actually cooks.
That's right. And so they do talk about moving from the periphery of a group to the center. And so for a while, what will happen is people will watch. But if you want to become part of that group, you're going to have to start participating actively. And the final thing is that these communities form around a practice, and that practice involves learning how to participate, learning what it's like to be in that discipline, how to produce, how to do, or how to make. And all of this is about becoming better. So this is about practicing in order to improve your skills. Ideally, a classroom community of practice would involve a group of learners who are working on a passion. They are engaged. A number of your 6-word stories talked about that passion or that love. And so getting people to engage around a domain of knowledge, ideally the topic that you're trying to teach, in which they are active participants and they're learning how to become people in that discipline, how to participate, how to produce, how to do, how to make. But most of our classrooms don't really allow time for all that. So what we get is a discourse community. And this is not really the same. This is just a group of people whose shared experience allows them to understand one another. They speak the same language. So let's think about a couple of community models and ways that we can consider how these models affect what happens in the classroom. So in many classrooms, we have what's called a recipe or standardized process where we tell students, we tell learners, okay, I want everyone to complete this exercise. I want you to do problems 1 to 20. I want you to write this essay. I want you to perform this experiment and follow this recipe. So we want people to complete an exercise. There is a clear assignment and there are expected results. But it turns out not everyone is going to quite make it to those results. So some people will make it to that expected results. Those people are all right. Some people won't quite get there. They'll be a little bit short. They can't quite get to the results as they're expected. Some people could go further, but they stop because, well, that's what you're expected to do. And so what happens is you get this rigid discourse community with alienated others who are either underachievers or troublemakers or teachers' pets or whatever. And so you get an antagonistic learning community around that. And really what you're teaching learners in this community is how to standardize themselves. How do I look like everyone else? That has a real problem when you're thinking about diversity and a community of diversity and valuing that diversity, because the structure of the learning system itself says diversity is a problem. So some people, you know, they use this structure, but what you're really getting is mimicry over innovation. So everyone is going to try to do things in the same way at the same time. You're going to find obedience and conformity over creativity. You're going to find a focus on authority over the development of collaboration or community. The standardization and abstraction are going to dominate over personalization and application. So this is less likely for learners to be at their level or to integrate into their own behaviors. It's going to be much more about them just going through the motions because they're expected to. And finally, there's going to be this shunning of outliers, in-group versus out-group members. So we could come up with a different process, a creative process, and some people love this one. Just make something creative, you know, just come up with whatever in my class, and I just want you to explore and, you know, follow your heart.
Express yourself.
Express yourself, right. And so in this classroom structure, well, there's not really an assignment other than be creative. So there are a lot of different kinds of things people will imagine or propose or they'll think about. I'm going to make a bird feeder that records the birds that come, and you're going to make a video game, and someone else is going to do
I'm also going to make a video documentary.
How handy is that? And some people are going to do like a service project in the community. There's going to be all kinds of crazy stuff. But what happens is, well, some people's proposals are at the level of some people's final projects, and some people, their vision for the project is not as, when they realize it, the realization of that vision is not as good as the vision itself. And so people kind of fracture and fragment. And as long as people are kind of working on related areas, then those people can talk to one another, but it's very hard for the communities, for the whole class to talk together. And it's especially hard for the teacher to support this because you have to be an expert in so many crazy things. So we've got a fragmented discourse community here. These processes tend to produce, there's a lot of creativity, but it fragments the community. So there's this kind of chaotic energy in the classroom. There's a lot of independence, there's a lot of personalization, but it's very hard for people to collaborate productively because their projects are often so different. There's a focus on output and application, but less on scaffolding and support. And a lot of that is because there just isn't as much energy for scaffolding. It's very hard for a teacher to do that. We see a lot of variation and novelty, but there's not a lot of comparability between projects, which makes assessment difficult for teachers. And interestingly, we once again typically get a shunning of outliers because the community in the classroom can't support one another. And because the teacher is, you know, so strung out because you're trying to do so many different things, if people already have resources, skills, experience, material resources, parents who can help them, they're going to do these great projects. The people who don't have access to those resources are not going to do great projects. And so we get this kind of fragmentation that happens again with in-group versus out-group. So let's think about a better strategy. And the strategy that the structure that we're going to think about, it's kind of a weird example. So when they were first developing the Macintosh, a bunch of engineers, they had this fight on the Macintosh team. So this one group said, you got to have this feature. And another group said, we don't have the space for it. It's stupid. No one's going to use it. But this one group, the first group led by a guy called Bill Atkinson, said, no, we absolutely have to have this. If we don't have this, this new kind of computer, this Macintosh will fail. And the thing he was arguing for was undo. And here's what Atkinson's argument was. Most people are used to computers that work by all these words and codes that you have to type in. And they're not going to be used to this graphical screen, and they're going to be nervous to try new things, because if you try something and it fails and you lose all your work, then you're back at square one. So he argued that you had to have undo, because without undo, people wouldn't explore. They wouldn't try something new because they'd be too worried. They'd only do the things they already knew would work. And so undo becomes a really important structure. And so we've been working on this strategy that we say, we call a platform process. And the platform is just something that you can undo to so that you don't fall through. So you get to here and you can build up from there, but if something doesn't work out or whatever, you can go back to the platform status and head off in a different direction. So it involves a starting point. It's kind of a mix of those first two learning structures that we talked about. So we're going to start with a challenge. I want everyone to make that, but I don't care how you get to that platform. And it's really about the experience of just getting your hands on a thing and trying it out. So if you need help from another classmate, if you want help from a teacher, if you want to go online, if you want to do whatever, we don't care how you get to this. And this is not the test. Because obviously, all I can really assess by making sure everyone gets to the same point is how well can you follow a recipe. And that doesn't tell me a whole lot about the learners. So we just want you to get to the platform so that you get your hands on it for an experience. It's like holding that bowling pin for a minute. Now what we want you to do, once you get to that platform project, now what we want you to do is tinker with it. So explore, change, if you're doing, like you've used this with Scratch.
So I've used it with Scratch, where I give students the first stack of code that they make, and then I let them play, change the value, change the order of the blocks, reverse things, see what happens. And then as you're doing this, you understand better how the code was put together and why it was put together in a certain way and what happens when you change it. So you gain a better understanding of what you're doing. And you start discovering things about it rather than just following the recipe. I've also tried this with video production, where I give students all the bits and pieces to put together a video, and we put the video together, and then I say, okay, now take that same footage and rearrange it to tell a different story. But the students have already gone through the process of putting it together, and all they're doing is changing the order. And then we can talk about ideas behind camera angles, framing, lighting, and background audio. What effect, if you change the music from a cheery music to a creepy music, does the story change?
And really what you're doing here is, it's what Piaget called schemata, right? You're building these mental models. Oh, okay, so I'm designing a game, and if I make those values negative instead of positive, here's what happens. You're learning about how the stuff all fits together. And so if you think about a video game, like B starts usually with just a ball and a paddle.
Right.
And so some people are going to play with, they're going to mess with the gameplay. They're going to tinker with making, the ball faster or getting extra lives. Some people are going to start tinkering with the graphics. They're going to change the backgrounds, or they're going to make it, visually more interesting. Some people are going to play with sound effects and music. And the great thing is, because everyone has this same platform that they're building from, if you do something really cool with music and I've done something really cool with graphics, I want to trade you my graphics for your music, and we can build on each other, and we can then tinker with those things too.
And the most important thing is we're learning from one another.
Yeah, so the community becomes a community of practice. It's really about this cohort of people working together and performing together around a domain. But what you're developing here is specializations. So because everyone shares the same platform, because it's built on that same platform, there's comparability. And so I can talk to other people and I can pull ideas that I think are really interesting. And what I'm doing with that is growing and changing as well. So we get a focus now on diversity. In fact, the more diverse my classroom is, the better. And so that valuing of diversity is a really important part of this process. So platform processes tend to produce, it's an emphasis on collaboration and community, a lot of sharing that goes on, a lot of communication that goes on, an adaptation of projects to conform to the learners rather than requiring the learner to conform to the project. A focus on scaffolding and support. So the teacher can help everyone out, but everyone else is also helping everyone else out. And if something goes horribly wrong, you can go back to that platform and take it in a different direction. There's a variation built on standards to allow comparability. And finally, there's this valuing of outliers and diversity. In fact, the people who are thinking in kind of crazy new ways become really important because they can help my project as well. So we call this follow, tinker, make, share. And so we start with some direct instruction, step-by-step procedures. Let's build this platform project together. Here's exactly how it works. Here's exactly what I want you to do. From there, we now want you to tinker. And this is really guided practice. So the way you build that platform project, and you don't want to build something that's really complex because you want to leave room for people to explore and try stuff out and tinker. And the tinker phase is always with existing features and elements rather than starting over. But as you're building, as you're tinkering with that and playing with that, you're developing mental models that then allow you to make. Now I can build my own project because I understand how all the pieces work. And then we bring that back with share, which is not just, here's mine, let me look at yours, but it's specifically comparison. Let's see the differences and similarities between ours. Let's coordinate or collaborate. What happens if we combine our projects and we could have a kind of super project that addresses a bigger concern? Or a competition. Which one of our projects uses resources best? Which one is most engaging? Which one solves the problem in the most elegant solution, or the one that uses resources in the best way? So it looks sort of like this. At the follow phase, there are a lot of different things we can do here. We could put video clips together. We could copy some code. We could mix a sample of reagent together. At tinker, we're going to start messing with the things that are there. At make, we're going to build our own stuff. And at share, we're going to come back. I seem to be lagging.
Yeah, give it a moment.
There we go.
There it goes.
We're going to come back again with competition, comparison, and collaboration. So it looks sort of like this. At the platform project, everybody's stuff looks the same. At tinker, you can tell the core is the same, but people's things are starting to look a little different. At make, people try all kinds of crazy things. And at share, then we bring those together. And the fun thing is, at the share phase, which there it is, it appeared, I can take something from the share phase and can bring it back as a new platform project and have everyone build that. And so we can iterate and start making more and more complex solutions. So we start with imitation, then variation, then combination, transformation, creation, and finally comparison, collaboration, and competition. And very quickly here, this is our last slide, thinking about what the platform looks like. And in 2 weeks, we'll walk you through designing one of these and talking about how to assess this. We're going to start with a footprint that gives access to key foundational concepts, skills, and tools, and ideally that collides people into some presuppositions, into that knowledge that they already bring. We want to start with a very basic structure that can be reverted to if the tinkering doesn't work out. So we don't want to go crazy. We want to make this the level of undoability. We want to think about lots of diverse ways for learners to interact and tinker. So if some people can do it with visuals, and some people can do it with math, and some people can do it with, you know, an application, and some people can do it. Ideally, we want lots of different ways for learners to come in. We want always room for additional building, including maybe if people want to alter and expand the platform structure. And finally, we want to think about all the different kinds of resources inside and outside the classroom that learners can bring in. I think we're often afraid of learners bringing in outside resources because our whole emphasis is on them completing the recipe. And so it seems like cheating if they get help with the recipe. But getting help with tinkering with the recipe and changing things and trying it out is actually what we expect people to do as adults, as people outside of our schools. So that's kind of where we are. So in 2 weeks, we're going to, we'll work through designing some class activities that use this framework. We wanted to introduce it today. Next week, it'll be mostly Bea doing talking because she's way better than I am. And now, if you have any questions, we're happy to chat, and you can unmute yourself and we can talk this out. But that's it, we're done. And I think with like 4 minutes to spare.
Yes.
And we started 5 minutes late. Look, someone is wanting to come into the room.
I just let them in.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment, but we can bring sharing back. So do you have any questions? What do you think about that? Do you hate that? Do you want to tinker with that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I love it. It sounds great. Like I'm actually doing like students are making documentaries right now in my class. So like the thought process of having a basic one, a platform for them all to jump off on would really alleviate a lot of problems we're dealing with right now. So, so thank you. Do you have any issues with students who like they see the platform and they just like, okay, well, it's already done. I'm not going to put any effort or energy into it. And even though you're trying to get them engaged in the community, they're less inclined to like put in any work.
Yeah.
And
so
how do you work with that?
we're going to talk about that in 2 weeks, but what you need to do, what I feel works very well is before you launch the project, the conversation with the students is a time to set the standard. So rather than the teacher deciding this is what the project needs to look like, you have a conversation with the students about what a high quality project looks like. So it's the students in collaboration with the teachers that set the standards. And from that, you drive a rubric. And so the students, it's a contract between the teacher and the students rather than a list of things that the teacher wants. And when you make a platform project, it should be just a fraction of what you need. So rather, for example, if you're making a documentary, you might make like a little introduction to show how the titles work and the transitions work and the framing and B-roll and, you know, split screen, whatever it is you're using.
And the goal there is just to introduce
right.
those basic concepts so that people have the experience of trying it, and then they can go into the other bits.
Your platform project should be a very pared down version of what the kids have already decided is a high quality project.
Let me speak from a slightly different angle on this, which is, so I use this, the most interesting example of this was actually with people who were doing computer science. Though I'm an English teacher, and I've actually used this in English classes as well, or a version of this. But What happened was in these computer science courses, the people who did really minimal projects, because so many people were tinkering and discovering and making these interesting things, started to feel enormous pressure from the other members of the community, not from the teacher, but because their stuff started to look so like they hadn't done much, that they started to feel sort of ashamed, and the social pressure of the classroom actually drove them to do more. So everyone else was kind of like, what, you didn't change anything? Okay. And that social pressure actually drove them then to go like, oh, and the great thing was they didn't necessarily come to the teachers. They went to fellow students to say, hey, I feel like I'm not getting this. Can you help me? And oftentimes that instruction was actually more meaningful, in part because it was non-expert. And so the other students could communicate more conveniently to them.
But that only happens if at the end of the project, the entire community sees the project.
Yes.
And not just the teacher.
Yes.
I don't believe in the teacher being the only audience of any project. Everything that you make should have an audience as much as possible. And I understand that if you're solving math problems, there's nothing exciting about, you know.
But if you're solving math problems because you're trying to figure out how to stop the flooding in the middle of town, and you're going to present that to the city council, then that's actually a much better project and something that really does engage people in a kind of meaningful way.
Right.
And so what I saw in a lot of your 6-word stories were people talking about service to the community, service even to the community of the classroom or the school. So kids solving problems and using this as an opportunity to do that becomes a really powerful motivator. Yeah, project-based learning, absolutely. Or service learning, absolutely. Did that help?
Yeah.
I know.
Thank you for the responses. It created like authentic assessments, and it really gave me feedback on like how I can kind of scaffold this and present it to the students. I really like the fact that like the answer, the social pressure, like re-engages them in the community and keeps them in the community. So they can focus on something. Like, let's face it, English is not the easiest thing to teach, especially when you're going into the more basic mechanics. So, but that's excellent. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and you know, the fun thing is too, like building a very basic structure where you've got, even if you've pre-shot a bunch of footage and you have everyone build with that same thing, they're getting the experience of holding the bowling pin in their hand. And as they assemble, you know, these pieces and add the soundtrack and add the transitions, but then if you tinker with it, so what happens if you change that fade transition to a jump cut, or what happens, how does it feel different if you know, reverse those? How does it feel if you do that different audio? So
we have an excellent question. How about a student that refuses to think and likes to copy from their friends? Well, when I've worked with students, especially, so last year I was working with kids teaching video game design in Scratch, because they could just jump in and work very easily. And what I told kids is they had to be able to justify their design choices to me. So if they just copied from someone else and I said, why are your, for example, why did you decide that that particular thing in the game was worth 5 points instead of 1 point? And show me in your code how you did that. So it's not just me looking at the game. I'm having a conversation with a student. Tell me about what you did. And when students are just copying what somebody else did, they can't answer those questions. And if they have to do it when they're presenting to the class, it's going to be uncomfortable for the student. So it's not about shaming the student, because you're not going to spring this on them unaware. It's going to be out in the open, just like when you set the quality standards, it's very transparent from the beginning, right? The kids help set the standard and they know what's going to happen. So when you say, okay, tell me about your game, show me where in your game you did this. So when you ask them questions, show me how you did this, tell me why you did this, where did you find this information? They can't just go around copying stuff. And the other thing is, if you stress that you don't want all the projects to look the same, you don't want everybody's, whatever it is they're making, they shouldn't be a replica of one another. Everybody has something inside of them that's different. So everything that they make should be different, and it should be representative of their own preferences and abilities.
And that's where tinkering kind of comes into play as well. So part of what happens is, again, from the social pressure of the community, and especially a community of practice, if I'm the one who's just like, I'm going around saying, hey, give me your code, give me your code, give me your code, give me your code, or give me your, whatever, give me your whatever. What happens is I actually start to become a pariah in the community because I'm not making anything, I'm just taking things. And at a certain point, the community itself starts saying, I'm not going to give you stuff because you just take it and you pass it off as your own. And there is some value to actually just copying and trying it out. In fact, that's exactly what we're doing with the platform process. Is the platform is copying. And if I borrow something from someone else's stuff, like I know you were talking about when you were doing the coding thing with the games, if people tried to bring in a block of code from someone else's game and stick it into their code, it didn't work because there were all these other things that were like, I couldn't just take that piece and necessarily stick it in if I didn't understand what was going on,
and
or how to integrate
there's
it.
one more thing we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks: the way you schedule your project and the way you give students feedback while the project is in progress, right? So you don't just start at the beginning and give them the assignment and the next time you see it, it's completed. You're in constant conversation with the students as they're working. So you're always aware of what they're doing also. And so it's very difficult for a student to do something that you might consider inappropriate if you're in constant conversation with the students.
The thing that becomes actually really freeing about this process is, so when I've used it in my classes, the sincerest form of flattery, that's great. The thing that I found was, because I gave them the platform and then they were working and talking and supporting one another. So it freed my time actually from instruction, which I had always had to do, or clarification, or all these kinds of things, support and scaffolding, that was really informational. Instead, what I did was I wandered around the classroom and just asked questions and talked to people and looked at drafts. And so it actually reduced my workload in the classroom. I wasn't preparing lectures and examples and here's 20 problems to do, or here's a bunch of things to create. They were finding those on their own. And so I could actually spend my time doing the kind of more creative, teaching my discipline instead of building all these examples for them. And it was actually a great relief. I used it actually, so I taught at university, but I used this structure teaching literary theory, which is a weird idea. But I have my students making all these kinds of projects out of the theory, whereas before, when I was trying to be the informational center, the pressure of like, they wanted more and more help and, make me a guide to this theorist and, explain this bit of postmodernity to me and, whatever. And it was grueling and impossible. And when I switched to this process some years ago, it was so much more pleasurable for me as a teacher too. Other questions? There are always cheeky students.
Yeah, there are always
indeed.
cheeky students. You don't let them take over though.
Actually, in this experience, you kind of do let them take over.
Sometimes they're the best, they're the most fun kids to work with.
Yeah, well, what we found was that if there was someone who was just doing some crazy thing, I would get them to teach the class how to do that. And it was great actually, because on the one hand, if they were just grandstanding, it became really clear. Again, I love using the pressure of the community. So if they were like, oh, I'm doing this great thing, and I'd say, okay, show everyone. And then everyone kind of went, that's not really that cool. Then it put them in place and I didn't have to. But if they really did have something cool, then everyone was like, oh, wow, let's do that. And then as the tinkering would happen, they would take it to new levels. And it really is this idea of iteration where that cool idea would then spawn 10 other cool ideas. And the first person their project would actually get better because other people were doing interesting things. How long does it take you to transform? You know, I just did it in, like I went from one model to another model. I just did it cold turkey, and I actually did one of them mid-semester. I was teaching a class in business and professional writing, and I was doing all this stuff, and I switched to a service learning model. Literally, we were week 4 of the class, and it wasn't working out, and I said, okay, here's what we're gonna do. But it actually was really amazing, and the shift in the culture of the classroom. And so this is really not just one thing that we're talking about. We're really talking about culture and assessment, like culture and community and assessment and projects, and they're all kind of bound together here.
So I was very lucky. I switched from one school to another, and when I got to the other school, they said, you have a semester with these students. Do whatever you want with them as long as they use their computers.
That seems dangerous.
And so I designed a whole course around coding principles, and we did very basic stuff at the beginning, small projects, and then the big project at the end was design and code a video game. And
But like you guys built houses in
right,
SketchUp.
we did some 3D. I wanted them to learn to navigate 3D modeling on a screen. These were kids who were not very computer savvy, so I needed to give them lots of hands-on activities, and we designed houses using SketchUp. And so we designed a basic house, 4 walls with a door and 2 windows and a roof. And then I said, okay, add more windows, add another room, do some landscaping around it. So no, we did lots of things. So one of the questions was, how do you work with a kid who says, I've already done everything I needed to do? You can issue challenges. So you can say, well, can you make it do this? Or can you do this? Can you change the story so that it tells it has a different lesson in it? So when you walk away from it, you've learned something different. So in the tinkering, you shouldn't just let kids do it on their own unsupervised without listening to their, I don't mean that they're going to get in trouble, but you guide the conversation.
Yeah.
And when people are tinkering, when students are tinkering, it's important to showcase what they're coming up with. So as you're walking around and you notice what one student is doing, you might say, hey, show the class what you just discovered. Or if a kid is not participating, you say, hey, can you make it do this? Or can you do this? And so you have your platform projects, you have to have at least a slate of challenges that you can issue in the tinkering and making phases, so that the kids have, if they can't come up with something on their own, you have something you can give them.
But I think, again, you can also turn to the community. So, okay, class, let's look at B's thing. She doesn't know where to go next, and I don't know where to take her. So let's look at it, and maybe we can come up with something together. And again, thinking about that idea of communities of practice, which is really about professionalizing people into your discipline. This is what mathematicians do. This is what chemists do. This is what literature, writers do. This is what, so if you're thinking about acculturating people into that practice, and even little kids, I want my, that 8-year-old to understand what science is about, not as someone who's just going to consume recipes, but to think like a scientist, to think about, okay, we're going to have to grow something on Mars. What are all the things we're going to have to do to make that happen? And if I can get the community working together that way, then that community of practice is actually going to drive that disciplinarity, that expertise in that area.
So this is very important. When you're tinkering with students, sometimes you learn from the students, and you have to say, oh, I didn't know that, and you learn with them. So that idea that the teacher is not an all-knowing entity, So if, for example, I've always been very pushy with this with teachers. When a student asks something and you don't know, you don't just say, well, we don't need to know that, or we walk away from that question or just ignore it. You say, I don't know, let's find out together. And
which is about you modeling
you have
how a
to model,
learner
right.
in your discipline
So
learns.
you model how inquiry works. How are you going to, and then you go into all these other areas. How do you find the information and validate it? So if you find something like with the onions that you were talking about, is 5 minutes really how you cook onions? How do you know what the truth is, or what the best, and sometimes there's not truth, it's a matter of opinion. So how do you evaluate those things? And when you model that for students, it's important because it's hard to navigate those things sometimes. They're used to finding something, and whatever they find the first thing, that's it. So yeah, you're not an expert. Nobody's really, and especially when you're working in schools and with education, and if for example my field is technology, you're never done learning because there's always something new. And it's most true of technology, but it really is true of everything. There's always something new, there's always something you don't know. And so it's very important to model that for kids, that if you don't know, you don't make it up or ignore it, you go find out.
Well, and even, back to that idea of diversity and specializations. So part of what we've designed that tinkering phase to do is to show that not everybody has to become an expert in every area. You might specialize. Like I really specialized in my own professional training and work. I'm a medievalist. I'm not just a medievalist. I'm a 14th century medieval. I'm not just a 14th century medievalist. I'm a 14th century medievalist who focuses on heresy, right? Like 14th century British heresy is my thing. And there's a lot of other medievalists. There's this whole range of other people doing things, which is great because I can bring my understanding of my little slice, and they can bring their understanding of their little slice. And if we put those together, we can develop something really interesting. So part of the challenge for developing these projects is I want my kids to find something that is not something I know, because that way I get to learn too. And that community of practice, that idea of a professionalizing group, a guild, it's a way more interesting learning experience. And when we talk about, you're not doing it for the grade, you're doing it for the love of the discipline and for the joy of serving your community and for the pleasure of working with people who are dissimilar to you. And that, I think, becomes really, really powerful.
I don't think teachers should ever say that. Teachers should never say, don't ask me, go ask someone else. You always model it. It's important.
I'm going to disagree, actually. So I was talking about that computer.
You can always go and ask an expert. And I've had to do that. The kids one time asked me something about planets and I didn't know, but I knew somebody who had been a member of the Planetary Society. And so we planned a FaceTime call and he was our guest speaker. So
yeah, and actually, so I was talking about this computer science course. I helped design the I didn't teach this course, but I helped design the structure of it. And one of the great things was these kids were coming and they were building software, and they said, well, how do we monetize this? And the teacher said, I don't know. And they said, no, like, how do we do it? And the teacher said, I don't know. And it actually forced the students to go out and figure it out and do this extra work. Now that was at a very high level. This was university level, but saying, I don't know, and I don't even know where to look, can actually be a great spark to the students to find someone who does, or maybe someone's got a friend or a parent or some weird connection, and maybe I do too. And I think it's never a bad thing to say, I don't know, let's go talk to whoever and see what we can find out. And we'll go on this journey of discovery.
And it's true that you have, right now, there's no way of saying, I don't know, and I have no way of finding out. There's,
Twitter, as someone mentioned, that's exactly right.
Or bringing an expert to help out without having to bring them into the classroom via Skype or FaceTime or whatever,
Or Zoom,
is
yeah.
always really helpful. It's really fun.
Yeah. So I think, but the key here is if everyone is, and back to a kind of earlier question, like how do you make this change? Because I'm a teacher who likes to deliver. Part of what we recognized was that most teachers, it's pretty uncomfortable for us to like not be the expert and not be the deliverer. And so ironically, this follow, tinker, make, share is also a structure for you as a teacher, because you're going to do this thing that you're used to doing at the very first. I'm going to give you the recipe and I'm going to, you know, do what I do. But at the tinker phase, you're sort of weaning yourself off from that expertise and you're tinkering with what it's like to be a teacher who doesn't necessarily just, you know, deliver the projects and deliver the information. So I don't know, this feels a little weird and I'm not quite sure how to do it. And I feel a little awkward, but by letting, you've got all the support of the classroom and people making that, you can tinker with your own responses to creative project-based learning. And so when then you get to the make phase, you're ready to make as well. Like you've tinkered with your own experience as a teacher so that you're ready then to kind of step back. So, and then, you know, if you're doing this with colleagues, like if a bunch of you in IARCOS want to do this together and kind of talk, and we would be glad to help with that or to you know, consult. It gives you an opportunity then in sharing to say like, okay, here's my experience, what's yours? We can compare, we could collaborate, you know, together, or we could compete. Like, I think my way is better. Here's my project, you know, and that's okay. Because that kind of competition again can drive us to perform as well. So what we were thinking about as we were developing this framework was, how do you help most teachers move from a delivery-based informational architecture to a constructionist learning by making architecture in their classrooms, and make everyone feel comfortable. So the structure actually works at both a macro and a micro level, or a meta level. So it's something that the learners can do, but it's also a chance for you as a teacher to move from that kind of delivery model to a more engaged constructionist model. What did that say? Yeah, it will absolutely take time for students to get. When I first introduced this in that literary theory class I was talking about, ironically, some of the best students fought it the hardest. And the reason was that they were the best students by grades because they knew how to game the old system. Like, I know how to work on tests and I can do this stuff and I'm a study hound and I got this. And what, you're making us do projects now?
They were used to having the right answer and the wrong answer and always giving the right answer. But when you focus on the process, it's a more valuable experience.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the overall performance of the class was dramatically improved. But for those few students who had been there, it was really jarring for a while.
We almost ran out of battery right now.
I just now saw that. We had you plugged in and not me. We have two machines here at work. So, because it's hard to see comments on, I don't know, it's complicated. Anyway.
And I monitor the audio.
Yeah, I know you have that earphone in. I think we have just a few more minutes. I think we're meant to end at 1/2 past, whatever hour you would like to associate with 1/2 past.
Parents, that's a tough one.
Well, you know,
I think parents are willing to come along if if they see that the kids are actually making something and you have something to show. Look at what your child did in class. So the students might feel uncomfortable with this. You know, I don't know what the right answer is. I'm not used to working in a team or whatever it is. But when you show parents, look, your child actually made this, or your child participated in this. I've always found that they're more likely to understand that children are learning, even if it's something new and different. So you have to have something to show. So I love having students have an open house for the parents. If it can't be in person, having a classroom website.
Yeah.
Where you
or
can,
a blog.
or, you know, some learning platforms have places where parents can have access to things, but it's only, for example, you know, learning management systems like Schoology or Google Classroom. Parents can kind of glance in, but you really can't see projects. So having a classroom website where you can showcase what students are doing, then even if it's not a digital product, you know, showing photographs of what the kids have done. You don't have to have the kids in the pictures because I know that that's a problem. But having the parents be able to see what the kids are doing in class and showing it in progress and showing how it starts and how it ends, and highlighting the skills that the students are acquiring as they're participating in projects gets a lot of buy-in from the parents.
And as Rebecca says, I think that's right. If you can connect it to curriculum and standards, but also this idea of, we try to mimic the real world by actually having students produce these projects. So this isn't just like going through the motions and making something up that's never going to see the light of actual day.
Yeah, nobody wants to hire somebody who knows how to fill in worksheets really well.
Right.
That's not a job.
But you know, if you can use this, if this can be something that benefits your school community, for example, or something like we did that project at your school. The students were math students and they were low performing. They were in a remedial math course, but they redesigned
they redesigned the lunchroom. They collected, the class was supposed to be a math class where they were learning how to use a spreadsheet and calculate stuff on a spreadsheet using formulas. And we didn't want it to be meaningless. And so we had the students collect data about the time it took students to be in line in the lunchroom, get their lunch and sit down and eat, and how many kids were there total. And they wanted to improve the flow through the lunchroom. And they did all this work and they figured out that the problem was not the speed at which the students were moving, but the way the tables were arranged. There wasn't enough seating. And so the kids were milling around and standing. And so nobody knew where the line was. But nobody knew until they did this entire analysis of the flow of people through the lunchroom. And they figured it out, and then they redesigned how the furniture was in the room.
But the key was they actually, and so I worked with them as well, and they presented this to the school leaders. So there are problems, you know, the school lunch line is not efficient. There's a lot of unhappiness about it, and we know why. And here's how we can fix it. And when they did that, math for them was not, I mean, this was a remedial class, but it was not they didn't feel remedial. They felt like they were making a significant difference. They felt important. They were serving their fellow students, and it gave a meaningful reason for them to do that redesign. And I think the more we can engage people with a meaningful project and not just, you call it making landfill content.
Yes, when you're just, I hate it when you're just making landfill content. But the important thing is I did have pushback from the parents in this particular project because the students had to work during lunchtime. They were standing in the middle of the lunchroom during their free time
with like stopwatches
with a stopwatch and with a clipboard and taking down information, and with iPads taking pictures and video. And one parent called me and said, my child didn't eat lunch today. Why are you making my child work during math class? And I said, talk beyond the lunch. Ask him what he was doing and why. And the kid went to the parent and said, no, I wasn't, because the parent heard the child say, I didn't eat my lunch. And the parent thought the child was complaining, but the child was so proud of the work he was doing. And when the parent heard all this, she was very excited about it. She's like, I've never heard him excited about doing math. So
I think our time is about up. I'm so grateful for everyone showing up tonight. And in 2 weeks. So May 8th in Asia, May 7th, not in Asia. We'll actually kind of work through some specifics of this. We'll talk about some strategies for assessment. We'd love to see you. We hope that would work out.
And so if you come back and you already have an idea of a project, it's always helpful to have some ideas that we can then work through with real examples rather than with our examples.
Yeah. So in addition, we've recorded this session.
Sorry, I didn't mean to remind people that this is being recorded. And if you want to watch parts of it again, it'll be on the IRCOS website under past events somewhere, I would say by Monday or Tuesday, with the staff. It's the weekend, so the staff won't be doing it. But anyhow, I want to thank all of you for showing up, and thank you for such an engaging time together, Bill and Bea. And now, Bill, you have more to say, so please.
I was just going to say,
wanna
I will
thank
also
you to
send, I saw some people taking screenshots. I will send a PDF of our presentation also. So I'll send that to Ed, and so they'll have the video and the screenshots, and that will hopefully be helpful.
Yeah, and then finally, please do try to come to this next session. I think there's a great deal of value of following through on these, and I know it's a busy time of year, but I hope we'll see you again. All right.
And invite your friends.
For me, that's Friday night. Yeah. And I just see we have a tornado warning right now from the weatherman in Baton Rouge.
Good luck.
So
Good luck.
anyhow, have a great weekend, everybody. Bill and Bea, thank you so very much. It's been
Thanks so
Bye.
a real
much.
pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Learned a lot. Thank you.
Wait.
Thank you once again. Have a good one.